further down the line TV, Michael Logarzo.
Hey Betty, how are you? Sarah, thanks for having me.
Hey Mike.
Thanks for joining us, Mike. I know we're in a bit of a lockdown here in Melbourne, so this is a great way to spend a rainy afternoon. I wanted to ask you, what have you been doing lately over this period? How have you been using up your time?
Yeah, it's been an interesting period, not being able to go on court, but I've actually spent a lot of it doing online stuff, doing a lot of learning and just creating programs for the players and just researching, looking at whole heap of different things and just a lot of planning stuff. I mean, you do what you can. I've got so much information that I realized that I haven't looked at for so long that I've actually gone, well, I need to put this stuff together. So I've been spending a lot of time with that, but pretty keen to get back on the court.
Mike, one of the big things that you do is you build great relationships with your players. Talk to us a little bit about how you form those connections, the trust, and what goes into a coach building a relationship with their players.
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is that they're people first, and it's not just about the player. So it's really important that you get to know the person, even a bit of their background, and just try to connect with them on that level rather than we can get so caught up as coaches with, how to hit a forehand, how to hit a backhand and the results that I think really important first step is to just get to know the player, get to know what they're like, get to know their goals, even dynamics within their family, which allow you as much information as possible to be able to teach them the best way you can, both as a tennis player. But I think it's important as coaches that we're also developing the individual. If they want to go to that next level, that there's so many things they have to deal with, so many adaptations they have to go through going through the levels. So I think it's really important that we as coaches prepare them for that as best we can. So I think getting to know the person first is crucial.
And Mike, we talk a lot about that, don't we? We talk a lot about, we have those conversations, we adapt, we get to know the parents. Some coaches do it better than others. I know you do it really well. You've got your own coaching business called ML Tennis down at Parkdale. I know you coach a lot of our really, talented young kids coming up, and you've been coaching Zoe Hives for the past 7 years. You've had Zoe for a very long time. You've seen the growth in her. I think she's reached the top of 140 in the world not long ago. Has been plagued a little bit by injury. But how has that developed over time? What things have you implemented with Zoe over that 7-year journey?
Yeah, it's been a long journey, a lot of ups and downs. And, for me as a coach, also a lot of learning and a lot of growth. So I look at it as a journey between, not just for her, but for me as well. So as a team, we're growing together. I've always approached it that way. So if I remember back when we started, Zoe almost quit tennis. So she was about 16, one of the top juniors, but just had enough. And I think a lot of players don't lose the love for playing the game, but it's all the things that go around the actual playing, the traveling, the pressures that they struggle to cope with, and they're growing up as well. So for her, the biggest thing was, we've got to get your enjoyment back. So I had to make sure she was enjoying it, but also try to understand what her goals were. As coaches, sometimes we look at it from a results-based goal. What's the end goal? Ranking, Grand Slam level, winning tournaments. But every individual player has a different why as to the reason they're playing. And we had to discover that with Zoe. And it took a while. Zoe's quite shy. So it's just trying to build up that trust over a period of time. So, the way I communicated with her, allowing her to be herself, again, trying to find her identity, because I think it was crucial for her at this point of her career and her age, especially with so many things going on, that she probably didn't have her own personal identity. It was tied to her tennis a little bit, which I think is very common. So it was finding that, and then gradually we just built on those foundations that we set. We set goals from the very start. So I always took a long-term approach as to how I wanted to, how I saw the journey. And it was purely process orientated for her and understanding. I had to understand what it is that drove her. And for her, it's improving. It's not results. It's not, the glory and having all the adulation or anything like that. It was the process. It was going out every day, learning. It was her trying to find herself as an individual. And for me, you know, I had to learn that as well. So it wasn't a case of, yeah, I walked in and I knew exactly what was going on. You know, I think it's important that we allow ourselves to fail as well and to learn. And I think with her especially, she's seen that it's been a growth journey for both of us. And that's how I've approached it with her, and how I approach it with now all the players is, you know, I tell them I'm going to stuff up. Every lesson I'm going to stuff up. And they look at you like weird, but this is about the journey together. We're growing together because they're all different. You know, Zoe was different to a lot of other players, her peers, for example. So if I treated her exactly the same, then I probably wouldn't have got the results I did. So I had to make sure that, you know, I worked out what it is that she needed. And players will sort of tell you what they need, how they want to be communicated to, what drives them. It's not what I think. It's actually what they think. I'm there to serve her and figure out how I can best get that out of her.
I think, and I think that's the thing, isn't it, Stoney? Like, we have a lot of the kids these days aren't worried about sharing how they feel and what they like. I mean, you would have all experienced that with the generation coming up. They're all pretty confident, and they generally like to tell you if they don't like something, they'll tell you pretty quickly. So I think as coaches, we kind of grow with that, don't we?
Yeah, it's very much athlete-centered, the way we need to approach our coaching, looking at what works for that athlete. And obviously, Mike, that's right at the core of how you go about your business. You're widely known as the go-to guy, particularly in Victoria. When you've got a good kid, you send them to Mike. I know there's other go-to coaches, and that must come through the athlete-centered approach. People know that. For young coaches watching this, what kind of advice would you have for them when it comes to refining their coaching philosophy?
I think it's important to keep learning and not think you know everything. I think as young coaches, it's really easy. You think you know a lot. And then what I've learned and the way I approach things is, as you go on the journey, you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, you're constantly evolving. And I don't think your philosophy is set in stone. It keeps moving, it keeps changing. You're learning different things. I actually think working with the players you work with actually assists you in developing that philosophy. So working with Zoe, for example, for as long as I have, I've learned how to better communicate. I've learned, you know, how I want to deal with players and, you know, especially with the girls, you know, the first thing I would say to coaches is you've got to listen, you know, and boys and girls, but especially because you've got to listen to the player.
Absolutely.
Listen to the player and acknowledge how they're feeling and what they're telling you. We can be really quick at redirecting them, particularly if they're going through some negative periods and negative emotions. So I think it's really important to listen to them, acknowledge them, understand where they're coming from. So, you know, why it is they're thinking the way they are. And then also sharing your own experiences and how you've encountered similar situations from your experience. And then you once you get that connection with that player and that buy-in, I feel like it's an open book. They'll be more open with you. The communication gets better. You've got to create that safe environment for your players where they can come to you and be totally honest with you, almost to the point where they'll tell you stuff that they might not tell their parents, you know, just because there's trust on the court. And if they can trust you from a personal point of view, then they're going to trust you from a tennis point of view, and anything you do based on their tennis. So I think that's really, really crucial. If you don't communicate, don't get to know your players, don't help them form their own identity, then over the course of time, I think it fritters away and you lose that connection and they move on.
We see that. I've known you for a very long time, and I know we talk tennis a lot, so it's great to see you just following through with that. And, you know, I wanted to speak to you a little bit about, you know, we've all been coaches for a while now, and we've spent time on the tour and day in, day out grind. Both of you could answer this, but mainly obviously for you, Mike, is where do you draw the boundary with your players? Some players love to just have your time constantly and don't really care about whether you've got a family or not, or whether you have other things. You know, you're trying to balance your day out as a coach. Some players are really like standoffish about it. So what do you feel? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think you need to have some kind of boundary, because the important thing is for you to be able to do the best job you can. You've got to also, and the player has to also understand that you need to do what's best for you to give them everything you've got. So whether that's having your own personal time when you're out on tour, or, family time in between tournaments. I think that's really, really important. But at the same time, you've got to make yourself available to the player. They've got to feel like they can go to you at any point of time. It's just communication. I think if you're honest with each other and you have that kind of relationship, and then your values have to match up as well. If one player's going one way and the coach wants to go another way, then you're going to have that tension on tour. And this is part of the learning, like even I've gone through, is different moments and how I would handle it differently. Where I thought, this is best for me, but there's got to be some to and fro, and you've got to be able to find a common ground. I just think it's communication. I think if you communicate better and the player has your trust, it's more likely to happen. But yeah, definitely need some boundaries, because you need your own personal time as a coach to be able to give them whatever you need.
I don't mean to interrupt, and I just wanted to ask, well, I do mean interrupt because I'm very good at that, but I just wanted to ask you, on top of that same question is, that's fine when you got one player. What about the coach that seems to coach maybe 2 or 3 players? And we've had this happen, you've got 3 players, maybe 2 players, they've all started off at the same level, but then all of a sudden one gets a little more ahead of the other, and your time and heart is divided a little bit. You don't know which way to go, and it can get really difficult and awkward, especially when you're traveling with those players. Have you guys had that? Stoney, you've been coaching for a long time. Have you had that situation happen to you?
Typically, I try to not get into that. I'm not a coach that really believes, particularly at the top level, that it works that well to divide your time between 2 players. As players on the tour, it's all about them, and you're in a position of service. It's a selfless role as a coach. And I think you have to show that all about that player. I know particularly on the women's tour, there's not too many female players that want to share a coach. To what Mike said, I think working with those boundaries, you have to be upfront and clear with your expectations and what feels good to you at the beginning. It might be that you don't want any of the kids that you coach to follow you. You're not going to accept any private friend requests on your social handles. If it's your business, it's a different thing. But that's something that's each to their own. We're not therapists, so we're not blurring a line like that, having that engagement. Essentially, they are our friends. But if you're a coach that wants to retain that bit of space, doesn't mean that you don't care. You keep showing up for them in the way that you need to as a career. But you have to be careful that you're putting forward, I have a boundary after 8. I'll get back to you at 8 in the morning. On the weekends, that's my time. And it doesn't mean that has to be the conversation straight away. But if it comes up, you can share that with the family or whatever the case. What's your experience with that, Mike?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You've got to have those boundaries. For example, I don't add any of my students, other than the pro level players, but any of my students, my personal accounts or anything like that. My work one, that's fine, but you've got to have that space and that freedom to be able to live your own life as well. Because again, as I said, players are people. We are people as well. We all have different likes, and sometimes you and the player won't necessarily have the same interests. So if you're with each other 24/7, and little things can start to annoy you, you've still got to treat it as a work environment. Whilst you are traveling, you're there primarily to work with the player on court, off court. You can spend meals and do different things with them, but you also need your time to switch off. Otherwise you're on for 24 hours, and over a period of time, it just fatigues you. I mean, you guys will know, as coaches, there's a lot of downtime in between, even waiting for players as they do their physio, as they do their recovery, so if you don't have that opportunity to even just go out for a coffee and just free up your mind, you're not going to stay fresh, and you're not going to be able to last for too long on tour. So I think that's really, really important.
Mike, in that fresh part, you're a guy that works super hard and it's amazing. You do a great job. How do you maintain your balance between your work and your private life so that things just don't go off course, being such a dedicated coach and worker that you are?
I probably haven't been great at it. I've probably spent not giving myself enough time to do things I wanted to do, and just focused on the work aspect, and probably, and this is part of the learning. as over a period of time, you realize, well, I can't keep going like this because I'm not going to be able to do this for too long.
Correct.
And then, being married also, you also need to give time to your partner and make sure that everyone is getting what they need. So I think, again, it goes back to the boundaries you set at the start and the expectations that, okay, this is how it's going to be. These is the expectations. This is how we're going to work together. And then, obviously, as things progress, you can have different conversations, but I think it's really, really clear to make sure that you have those boundaries and that balance. I haven't been great at it in the past. I'm getting better. It's the ability to say no to people. And, young coaches, I think we want to be so available and want to do everything for everyone. And we overcompensate a little bit and then we forget about ourselves. And I find the more you do that, the more they expect as well. And when you take a time out and don't want to, I just need a break. I need a refresher a little bit, that you can get a bit of tension sometimes. So I think it's really important that they understand that if you want the best from me, I need to be able to have that balance.
Mike, one of our main roles as coaches is to fill the family in on what's happening, and our biggest stakeholders are our parents in clubland especially. How do you handle those conversations with parents when it comes to their child playing in tournaments, losing repetitively, sitting down with them? You have a disappointed, disgruntled parent, they're at your throat about the fact that they're spending so much money on private lessons and why aren't they winning and why aren't they getting better? I'd imagine we've all had those conversations before. How do you go about it?
Yeah, we've all had those conversations. I focus on the long term always. So when I get a 10-year-old kid, I'm thinking, how do I want this 10-year-old to play when they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22? Yeah. So I'll always ask them, what's the goal? So if the goal is, and most of them will tell you, I want to be top 100 pro, I want to win Grand Slams. Okay, if that's the goal, then that's what we're working towards. What happens in between is just a development phase to get to where we need to get to. So in terms of results, I'm constantly emphasizing that message that it's not about the results. And I think if you're thinking about that, and a lot of it comes down to pressure from other kids, other parents, especially. I find the parents are more competitive than the kids. More comes from the parents than the actual kids. So then I start to wonder, okay, is this about what the parent wants or about what the kid wants? And usually it's probably more about what the parent's seeing. So now, again, when they talk about, investing money into my child's tennis, well, yes, you're investing in their future. You're not investing in them being the best 10 and under, 12 and under. And usually we know from the research, from experience, that the best 10, 12-year-olds are early maturers usually. And some of the better players develop a lot later. So you've got to know where you're at. And I think that's a big mistake that people make, is they look too far ahead and they're not realistic with where they're at that moment. And so the planning's not right. So I sort of give them an outline of, okay, this is what the journey is going to look like. This is why I'm doing this. And parents are really important. I think and we talk about relationship building, I think parents are crucial to that. They are part of the team. You've got to keep them engaged. You've got to keep them on board. You've got to constantly update them as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and where it's going to lead to, and constantly do that. So the highs can't be high and the lows can't be low. You've just got to be committed, trust the process. And if at the end of the day, if a parent's not trusting the coach, they're going to look elsewhere. So I think as coaches, it's important that we're prepared to lose a student. We're okay with it, but we've got to stick to our guns and our values. And so for young coaches, I think it's really important that don't, do what they want you to do just for the sake of a couple of results. You've got to stick to what you're going to do and stick to your values and stick to your processes and everything that you believe in, because players come and go, and you want people in your environment that are on board with you and allow you to go on that journey with them.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the different pressures that you feel young girls deal with versus young boys, Mike?
Yeah, I think there are a lot. I think they grow up a lot quicker. They're generally a lot more mature. And I find they're more, someone told me this week, that they're more realistic about the journey and where they're going and what they want. It's not
for sure.
not all about the tennis. It's more about them as individuals, is how they feel, and finding their own identity. And I think a big problem is the identity is tied too much to the tennis. And they're trying to find themselves as individuals, as young adults, as they progress, and especially when they go on tour. And I think it's really common that a lot of females especially take time away from the game. It's just too much. I need to find myself as a person. I need to just live a little and just experience different things. And then they come back and they realize, no, this is what I want to do. I don't think we've given them that opportunity to actually decide whether it's exactly what they want to do. And going back to what I said earlier, it's the stuff around the playing. The playing's easy, I find. It's you know, when they get to that next level and they go and travel, it's different cultures, it's different, you know, diets, it's dealing with different people. And you probably find that just probably in general in family dynamics that parents are more protective of the girls than the boys.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Grown up that way. So I think it's important for us as coaches is when the kids are really young is that we're helping them develop those, you know, I call them personal excellence skills, life skills, you know, adaptability, how to deal with different situations, as well as the tennis. Because if we don't do that, you're going to encounter those problems later on. And I find that's really, really common. And I think, you know, as coaches, we probably don't spend enough time on that when they're young.
Yeah.
How do you go about that, Boo? How do you go about building those skills, those excellent skills that Michael's talking about?
I think it's really, like Michael said, it's so much easier to do when you are spending so much time with the player and building that relationship and trust. I think you can build that into a player over time. And I think the buy-in becomes a lot stronger over that period of time. I think it's trying to give as many facts, examples, truth to it. And I think once you get that, and I think they get that external buy-in as well, it just manifests itself into that path. And I think it's all about relationships. From my experience, it's all been about relationships. It's building that trust. It's building that loyalty. Being honest, I think, is the number one key. But the one thing I've experienced constantly with, especially females, is the constant comparison to other players. You know,
very true.
I was winning, I'm no longer winning, she's doing this, she's doing that, she's got this coach, that coach is watching that player, why aren't they watching me? You know, it's that we've all encountered that. And as a player myself, I can't sit here and lie about that. I've encountered that myself as a player. You know, why aren't they watching me? Why are they watching that player?
Yeah.
You know, you start to downgrade yourself because you think you're not getting, your validation is a coach watching you play. And I think that can be the start of a really negative spiral effect mentally. And I think that's the constant thing I feel we as coaches encounter a lot, especially with that younger female transition on the tour. They're the conversations. You're no longer talking about tactics. You're sometimes talking about some petty stuff. That
comparison.
Exactly. So I don't know how you guys deal with that, but I know my experience, it's chipping away at those things and talking about process, Mike, like you are. It's getting back onto why we're here, why are we doing this, what's our next move, rather than worrying about people that aren't in your circle.
Mike, if you notice that with young female players, and you can kind of see you've got quite a few players that could get that comparison, that competitiveness. If you notice girls kind of dividing, and that can be pretty dangerous to a training environment, what sort of things do you pick up on? Like, what is the noticing? And then when you notice it, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it can happen. They get quiet a lot and they sort of steer away from the group. So we could all be standing together and one will tend to stay on the side or a little bit quiet. They just won't talk. And it's not just the young girls, you know, older players as well, pro level players will do the same thing. You notice it straight away. And it's usually a look that I notice. And so for me, what I try to teach, we all know it. What I try to teach them and all the students is that you're all in this together. You're not competing against each other. So if I've got a group of 12-year-old girls, for example, if we work together, we're going to push each other. We're all going to get better together. We're competing against, you know, kids all over the world, you know, thousands of them who want to do exactly what you do. So if you start comparing to other players at your age, you know, state level, then you're going away from what you're actually trying to do, because they're all growing up differently. They're all at different individual levels. So there's no use comparing. And the other thing, going back to what you said, Beti, I think when they start to think all those different things about, so-and-so is watching that person, and I think it comes down to their identities tied up to their tennis solely.
100%.
Not them as individuals. So it's really important if you get to 16 and you notice that as a coach, you start working with someone pretty much like I did when I started with Zoe, is that it was too much tied into her tennis, that you got to work on that. And that might take time, but you've got to spend that time to allow her to grow into a young adult. And it's taken a while for her and her journey, and there's been ups and downs. But when you go back to the young kids, I think it's really important to see them all individually and that you're on different journeys with different kids. And yes, there are commonalities and you've got your values and the way you teach and stuff, but you might deliver the message in different ways. You might be at different points of development where one may progress a little quicker than the other, but you've got to make that other person realize that that doesn't mean that that person's going to get to that level and you're not to. So I think it's just constantly feeding them the information, examples, and kids are pretty good. They'll listen to coaches more so than, say, parents, because kids want to know who you are and what you've done. So if you've got that experience and you've worked, and I'm not going to lie, it helps working with Zoe, because I can go back to these younger girls and use them as an example. And it's almost like they see her as a mentor to them as well. And what she's done, she's been on the same journey I have. So, I understand it a lot better. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mike. And, the kids are very lucky to have you. And I think I say this every time I see you. They all look so excited to come, into the doors, gates open up at Parkdale. And generally when I've been there in the past, they're all thriving. They're all happy and you do a fantastic job. I just want you to share one really fun fact with us, Mike, because recently I posted a photo of Steffi Graf, and I think it was 10 athletes that influenced our childhood. And I posted one up and you shared a pretty awesome story. Can you talk us through that story about Steffi Graf, you being a hitting partner to Steffi Graf, actually?
Yeah, it was the 97 Australian Open. I was still playing juniors. So it was actually a busy time for me. I was playing juniors. I got a wild card into men's quali. So there's so many things going on, and I get a call asking if I wanted to hit with Steffi Graf the next day. And I'm like, is this for real? I'm on Rod Laver Arena hitting with Steffi. And then they asked me to be her hitting partner for the tournament. And it was fantastic. And at first I was a little nervous, a little intimidated. I'm hitting with the number one player in the world. And I meet them at the hotel. I still remember it was a Como for breakfast, and they were the nicest. Drove in with them to the tennis center. We hit, and they worked around me, which I found incredible. This is the number one player in the world, working around my schedule. Like I was playing, ITF Junior tournament, leading tournament to the Aussie Open, and they asked me, when are you playing? Okay, let us know when you're available for a hit, and so on and so on. But yeah, it was an incredible experience. I learned a lot of things that I still use today. Just structured. Yeah, she was very thorough, and the session was always structured around how she wanted to play. So she, every hit we'd go down the middle, then we go cross court both ways, and down the line both ways always. She'd work on her inside out forehand. Slice backhand was a big part, moving me around. So I did a bit of running with that. I enjoyed it because I love slice backhand.
So you up with the slice, Mike?
It was actually not bad. We were doing slice backhands cross court for a while, and I was loving it. So I didn't mind. Didn't like it when it went to my forehand, but to the backhand. And it was great. And the only unfortunate thing was it was that tournament that she lost early in the round of 16. So a lot of players sort of looked at me. And,
didn't happen many times, Mike.
No, it didn't happen. It just happened to be that one that I hit with her. So
maybe your slice was just too good.
Yeah, I think it was the kick serves. She didn't like the kick serves.
Yeah, that's been it.
Really good experience.
Mike, you've shared so much great information with us, so many takeaways, both for myself and Beti, but everyone who's listening, and we really sincerely value your time and appreciate you. I want you to close out with telling us, why does Michael Logarzo coach?
I coach because, one, I love the game, and two, I have a passion for developing people and players, and my goal is to develop the next champions in Australian tennis. That's my goal. That's why I coach. Whether, they're not all going to achieve that level, but, each and every person that comes into our program, I would hope that we give them the best possible coaching we can, and let them dream big and let them decide what they want to do. Not up to me to decide, but them, and at least give them that opportunity.
Love it, Mike.
All right.
Love that message. And Sarah, just to close this out, I first of all want to close it out by acknowledging the fantastic 9 women that made the WTA happen, and you're wearing a jacket to commemorate that. So what year is that jacket, by the way?
1912. No, I was this big. Talk about developing early when I was 13 on the Junior Fed Cup team, and it still fits me. My other jacket from the 16s Junior Fed Cup, I actually switched jackets with Andy Roddick. So I've got an American one back in America, and I don't have that one, but I've got this little piece of Oz. So it's fun to remember the old times and just have that as a piece of you, the original 9 for women and women in tennis, and what Billie Jean led, and Gladys Heldman and the whole crew, Judy Dalton. It was unreal. And guys like Mike being on board, really behind women, makes such a difference for us growing the women's game. So we really appreciate you. And thanks for being a male who leads, an advocate for women, and look forward to keeping working together.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Thanks, Mike.